How did he feel politically and doing some of these movies? He was under contract to RKO for quite some time, and Howard Hughes, as you mentioned, owned the studio there, and he was starring in movies like I Married a Communist and some of these other movies. Did he ever vent or after the fact talk about the whole Hughesian RKO experience at that time?
Well, he didn't like to talk about I Married a Communist, that's for sure. His son told me he wouldn't even mention the picture's name. And that was a picture that he did basically to keep his job, because that movie, when Hughes was running RKO, it became sort of a litmus test to prove your loyalty, and if you refused the script, you got fired. So that was something that he did basically to keep his job. And it's a funny thing. I read quotes about Ryan all the time, saying he was a two-fisted liberal, he was a fearless liberal, all of these things. And there's some truth to that, but what I found much more interesting about the story was how he managed to get along during that period and to be, I think because he grew up in a political household and sort of was familiar with retail politics, he had a pretty good sense of what he could get away with. And
the old get along to go along type of thing.
Yeah,
sure.
And so he was certainly more active politically during that period than most people in Hollywood. And yet he knew what he could get away with, and that's what he did. So I think he had a very good political sense. He tended to make pretty good decisions about his political activities.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I know he was very close to his wife, and when she passed away, that was obviously devastating to him, the whole family. But in the later, his last few years, didn't he get involved in a relationship with Moreno Sullivan, who was one of the stars of our next picture, The Big Clock?
Right. Yes. They met a few months after his wife died. I guess 6, 7, 8 months after that, they met at a dinner party and started seeing each other. And there's a lot of debate about that. Obviously, it was painful, I think, to people who were close to him, who had known his wife. And then there were other people who were friends of his who thought it was a great relationship, and they were happy to see him, getting out and instead of grieving and drinking, which is what he was doing before that. It's hard for me to assess exactly whether that relationship would have kept going or what. Apparently they were going to get married after a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But then there were other people who felt that he just needed a woman to look after him because he was just one of those people.
Mm-hmm. How did he say anything about one of my favorite movies that he was in was The Wild Bunch? A terrific movie. What was I've heard stories from Borgnine, some of which I can't repeat here on this stage, about being down there with all of those guys and Ben Johnson and in Mexico and so forth. And Borgnine had so much admiration for Ryan as an actor and a person. What was the Ryan Peckinpah experience like?
Well, Peckinpah liked to sort of antagonize his actors all the time. So I mean, everybody in the cast had run-ins with him. I think at one point Ryan wanted to go campaign for Eugene McCarthy, and Peckinpah said, "No, you can't do that. We need you here." And then Ryan spent the next 10 days showing up on the set in costume, and they never used him once. And so he was pretty angry about that.
Yeah.
It's interesting about The Wild Bunch. I mean, this was a guy who's a confirmed pacifist, and he's in this movie where, there are 170 people get killed in this movie in the course of this film. And at the time, now movies are so violent, that would be nothing. But at the time, this was just an incredibly violent.
It was very controversial in 1969.
Extremely controversial, and that was sort of I think that was a tough fence for him to straddle, because he thought it was a good picture, but at the same time he was a peacenik, and he was a nonviolent person, believed in nonviolence, and so that was it was hard for him to promote that picture, so I think that was kind of a tough square for him to circle for him to square, whatever the expression is.
What about another one that sticks out in my memory, The Dirty Dozen, over in England?
The Dirty Dozen actually was pretty good for his career. I don't know that he had much of a had much feeling about it
Affinity
one way or
for it,
the
yeah,
other. It
yeah.
was certainly a picture where he wasn't, toward the end of his career, he started getting a lot of these roles where he was sort of kind of the oddball. He's sort of the oddball character in the Wild Bunch. He's the outlaw who's has to track down his old friends. And then the Dirty Dozen, he plays this sort of martinet, this Colonel Everett Dasher breed, who's like a West Point man, who's sort of the villain of the first third of the picture, I guess.
Right.
He's sort of Lee Marvin's
Yeah.
antagonist in the movie.
Yeah.
And so he, and I think that's a fine performance too. It's really funny. I mean,
It is funny. He is
could actually
funny.
do comedy
Yeah,
really well.
he could.
But to
could.
him, it was just it was a job and paid well. The picture did well. It was good for his career.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I remember Lisa, Robert Ryan's daughter, who's a mutual friend, said she went over there with him. And I think she was, what, 16, 15?
Yeah.
They were shooting it in
Yeah,
England,
sorry,
and
right.
she was hanging around the set, and all of a sudden, Lee Marvin starts coming on to her, and Ryan had to go, Lee, this is my daughter. Back off, and Lee said, oh, sorry.
Right. She said it was literally like he got hit with a cattle prod, and
Yeah.
left away from her.
So, with this, the book, the life and the career of Robert Ryan, what do you think his legacy is? Did you draw anything from the whole experience of writing the book about Bob Ryan?
Well, I mean, as an actor, I think he was, even though he wasn't a gigantic icon like some of the other people of that era, I think he was pretty daring about the parts that he chose, and he did even though we remember these really dark parts, he made a lot of movies where he was the hero and did romantic pictures and did all sorts of things. And so I think he tried to enlarge what a leading man could do by taking some of these other roles. And I think you see that now. I don't know if you would see an actor like Tommy Lee Jones or Robert De Niro or some of these people that we see now that have this sort of volatile quality. I think he was sort of a precursor to that whole school of character acting.
Well, here it is, The Lives of Robert Ryan, J.R. Jones. He will be signing it.
Thank you very
And
much.
thank you, Jim from Chicago. Thank you so much.